Hello and welcome to the eOrganic webinar on Getting Equipped, USDA Conservation Programs for Organic and Transitioning Farmers by Jim Riddle. My name is Alice Formiga and I'm the webinar coordinator for eOrganic. eOrganic is the organic agriculture community of practice with e-extension. We are a community of cooperative extension service personnel, researchers, ag professionals, organic certifiers, and practitioners. You will be able to find the recording of this webinar, information about our upcoming webinars, as well as articles, videos, and more by going to our website at www.extension.org/organic_production. If you have a question for Jim Riddle at any time during the webinar, just type your question into the question box on your screen. We will be reading out the questions and he will answer them at the end of the 45-minute presentation. We are very glad to have Jim Riddle as our speaker again today. This is Jim's third eOrganic webinar, and you can hear his two previous webinars on the ABCs of organic certification and the organic certification of research sites and facilities on our website. Jim has worked for over 26 years as an organic farmer, inspector, author, policy analyst, and educator. He was the founding chair of the IOIA, or International Organic Inspectors Association. He also co-authored the International Organic Inspection Manual, and he's trained hundreds of organic inspectors throughout the world. Jim also served on the Minnesota Department of Agriculture's Organic Advisory Task Force, and he was instrumental in the passage of Minnesota's landmark organic certification cost share program. Since January 2006, Jim has worked at the University of Minnesota's Organic Outreach Coordinator. Jim is also the former chair of the USDA's National Organic Standards Board and is a leading voice for organic agriculture. In our question and answer session, we may also be joined by Ariane Lottie, who is a policy associate at the Organic Farming Research Foundation and also assists at the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition in its research, policy, and appropriations work. I'm now going to turn things over to Jim. There may be a short pause while we transfer the microphones.
Thanks, Alice. Just to mention a little bit more about my background, in addition to what you said, I currently serve as a Soil and Water Conservation District Supervisor in Winona County, which is in southeast Minnesota, and a few weeks ago chaired our EQIP local working group. So this is an area that I have experience and certainly passion for, that is implementing conservation practices on organic and transitioning farms. I'll be speaking today about the Organic Initiative and under EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, and the opportunities that are now available for organic and transitioning farmers to access support from the Natural Resource Conservation Service to implement organic practices on their farm. But first, or to implement conservation practices. But first, I would like to go through some of the regulatory requirements under the National Organic Program, specifically as they relate to conservation, biodiversity, and the protection of natural resources. And we begin, once again, with the definition of organic production. Under the NOP, the National Organic Program rule, organic production is defined as a production system that's managed to respond to site-specific conditions by integrating cultural, biological, and mechanical practices that foster the cycling of resources, promote ecological balance, and conserve biodiversity. And I've highlighted those last features because those are totally pertinent to what we'll be discussing today and to the programs that NRCS offers for organic and transitional farmers. And I find it interesting that in the preamble to the final rule, what USDA had to say about that definition of organic production. They amended the definition to require that a producer must conserve biodiversity on his or her operation. The use of conserve establishes that the producer must initiate practices to support biodiversity and avoid, to the extent practicable, any activities that would diminish it. Compliance to conserve biodiversity requires that a producer incorporate practices in his or her organic system plan that are beneficial to biodiversity on his or her operation. So that's some of the reasoning behind that ecological protection language specifically related to conserving biodiversity that's part and parcel with the definition of organic production. Section 205-200 under the general requirements for organic agriculture states that production practices must maintain or improve the natural resources of the operation, including soil and water quality. So once again, this is very much an ecological production standard, and the natural resources of the operation must be maintained or improved in order to comply. The regulation even defines that phrase, natural resources of the operation. Those are the physical, hydrological, and biological features of the production operation, including the soil, water, wetlands, woodlands, and wildlife. So it's the entire production environment that must be protected. Some of the standards related to conservation and natural resource protection: the fertility and crop nutrient management standard states that the producer must select and implement tillage and cultivation practices that maintain or improve the physical, chemical, and biological condition of the soil and minimize soil erosion. So the producer must be maintaining or improving the soil and minimizing soil erosion. So it's not organic by neglect. It's not just cut out the chemicals and it can be organic. No, you must be maintaining or improving the soil and preventing erosion. That same section goes on to state that the producer must manage plant and animal materials to maintain or improve the soil organic matter content in a manner that does not contribute to contamination of crops, soil, or water by plant nutrients, pathogens, heavy metals, or residues of prohibited substances. And this particular standard, it reiterates maintain or improve the soil, but also it regulates how that fertility management is implemented. It must be done in a way that doesn't contaminate crop, soil, or water with plant nutrients, pathogens, etc. So that can be a reason for installing a waterway, for instance. Minimizes erosion, but also protects from contamination by filtering any water either running onto the farm or running off of the farm. The regulation says that the producer must not use burning as a means to dispose of crop residues, except burning may be used to suppress disease or to stimulate seed germination. So if someone is growing native prairie crops for medicinal herbs, and fire is a natural part of the cycle to stimulate germination, that would be an allowance, but just the burning of crop residues as a means of disposal is prohibited. The crop rotation standard is a fundamental requirement. It's so important that it has its own section number, 205.205, and it states that the producer must implement a crop rotation including but not limited to sod, cover crops, green manure crops, and catch crops that provide the following functions as applicable to the operation. And those are: maintain or improve the soil organic matter content, provide for pest management in both annual and perennial crops, manage deficient or excess plant nutrients, and provide erosion control. And this is another area where the NRCS Organic Initiative under EQIP has funds to improve the crop rotation, to get more cover crops into your system, to help manage those nutrients and provide erosion control. So it's a very good match for that crop rotation standard. The crop pest Weed and Disease Management Standard lists, and I have them summarized here, some of the various strategies to implement, and many of them match up with practices supported by NRCS. The crop rotation, good field sanitation, this would be removing weeds, weed seeds, vectors of disease, selecting plant varieties that are resistant to disease or pest pressures, mechanical and physical measures, of course, but the introduction of predators or parasites, and the development of habitat for beneficials. And that's one that there's a lot of potential for utilizing the EQIP Organic Initiative to help put diverse plantings along field borders, streams, roadways that then provide habitat, food sources for beneficial organisms. I put this in just because I love a picture of morel mushrooms every once in a while, especially when it's snowy here in Minnesota and we can only dream of future fungi. But there is a wild crop harvesting practice standard, and it also says that the natural resources must be maintained. A wild crop must be harvested in a manner that ensures that such harvesting or gathering will not be destructive to the environment and will sustain the growth and production of the wild crop. So once again, that long-term sustainability, the environmental protection must be taken into account with any wild crop harvesting operation in order for it to be certified organic. The livestock section has changed recently with the publishing of the new Pasture requirements. I haven't implemented all of those changes here yet, but I'll point out a few places where there are some new language in the rule. But that language only enhances the need for protecting the soil and water quality, the natural resources of the operation. The producer of organic livestock must establish and maintain living conditions, accommodate the health and natural behavior of the animals, including access to the outdoors, shade, shelter, exercise, fresh air, sunlight, suitable to the species, its stage of production, which is now stage of life, the climate, and the environment. And then access to pasture for ruminants. That's still there now. It sets specific metrics of a minimum of 120 days per year on pasture and a minimum of 30% dry matter intake during that grazing season. So when the conditions are appropriate for the animals to graze, they must be on pasture, and it must total up to at least 120 days per year. And it doesn't have to be continuous days. You could have a few months that are excellent grazing, and then things dry up, and then you can put the animals back out in the fall for more grazing, so long as it totals at least 120 days. And there will be another webinar specifically on the new pasture requirements. But I just wanted to bring that, acknowledge that there has been a change just in the last week on the pasture. But the definition of pasture remains the same, and that is land used for livestock grazing that's managed to provide feed value and maintain or improve the soil, water, and vegetative resources. So it has to have something to eat, but it also, the soil, water, and vegetation must be maintained or improved. And this is another area where the NRCS has a lot of resources for setting up a prescribed grazing plan, watering systems, fencing systems, and pasture renovation. So it's certainly another opportunity to look into. Animals can be temporarily confined, for inclement weather, etc., but also if that would cause a risk to soil or water quality. So this is something that is still in the new revised regulation, where if the animals being on pasture would cause harm, would cause erosion or water pollution, that's a reason why they can be temporarily confined. And that's another thing to look at NRCS programs to help in that kind of situation, the areas where the animals are temporarily confined, that area is well designed so that there's not damage or water quality implications. I just cite a few studies. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but here's interesting research from Iowa State University looking at organic and conventional cropping systems and yields and soil quality. Well, they're finding that by the 4th year of the organic rotation, the corn and soybean yields on the organic rose above those on the conventional fields. And they attributed that to the improvements in soil quality, more soil organic matter, enhanced microbial activity, and more diverse communities of organisms, and reduced soil acidity. The Rodale Institute has done long-term research, and one of the things that they have found is that organic soils, largely because of that increase in organic matter, produce higher yields in drought years. And also there may be a role of the mycorrhizal fungi in the soil with the organic crops. They also have been looking at soil carbon accumulation in organic and conventional systems. And this chart shows, or graph shows, 25 years of research. The bottom line is the soil carbon level under conventional management, and you see that it is relatively flat over time, whereas the top two lines are organic systems, one using animal manure and one using a legume rotation, and you're seeing that the soil carbon level is continuing to increase with that management system. Another difference between organic and conventional is that organic prohibits the use of genetically engineered crops or any GMO inputs, and this also has environmental implications. We've seen a drastic decline in the populations of monarch butterflies and swallowtails, for instance, and that makes sense because they're lepidopterans, and the BT crops are toxic to lepidopterans. But here we see research from Indiana University showing that the residues from the BT corn harm aquatic insects and disrupt stream ecosystems. The caddisfly in particular experience high mortality and stunted growth when exposed to BT corn pollen and crop residues. That was published in Proceedings of the National Academy. An international study, review of research done around the world shows that organic farming increases biodiversity at every level of the food chain, all the way from the bacteria to mammals. This was a review of research done in Europe, Canada, New Zealand, and the U.S. So a very comprehensive review showing that these practices do enhance biodiversity. So now to talk about the EQIP program, and it really is a policy objective of USDA now to integrate organic systems throughout the conservation programs. That was reflected in the 2008 Farm Bill and is being carried forward by the USDA. So two specific provisions in the 2008 Farm Bill that affect conservation on organic farms. The first is the Conservation Stewardship Program. That's a program to reward farmers for existing practices and enhancement of existing practices. For certified organic producers who really have addressed all of their resource concerns, this can be a very good fit to receive some acknowledgement and support for those ongoing efforts implementing conservation on organic farms. That has an ongoing sign-up, although there are scoring periods when They take everybody that's in the pool and rank them and issue contracts to the ones that qualify. But it's no longer by watershed. It's offered nationwide and is a very good option for existing organic operations that really have addressed their resource concerns. But for operations that are transitioning to organic or are currently certified but could use some assistance enhancing, maintaining, improving their natural resource methods and have some specific resource concerns, then the EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program Organic Initiative, is a very good option. And that is open for sign-up also continuously, but there's a scoring period coming up March 12th. So there is kind of, quote-unquote, a deadline approaching. The first year of operation for this organic initiative was 2009. There was $50 million allocated nationwide specifically for this program, for organic and transitioning farmers to implement conservation practices. They had to implement some of what were called 6 core practices. These were identified as likely practices to be used by organic farmers, and a farmer would have to have some of those resource concerns first, and then if they had some of the core six core practices, then they could add on facilitating practices that were offered in various states. There was a very short rollout time last year, not near enough time for nationwide publicity. The sign-up periods came and went pretty quickly, it seems, especially for a brand new program. But still, there was 36 million of the 50 million was contracted. There were about 2,900 applications, with about half of those receiving contracts that average about $25,000 per contract. There were over 800 applications that were still in the pipeline, not fully processed by the end of the fiscal year. And NRCS has worked with the organic community to improve beyond that pilot year and has sought input and made some modifications to the program. This year it's the same allocation of $50 million. Last year, different states had different deadlines, different sign-up periods. This year, we're all playing by the same rule book. There's one date, nationwide, March 12th. And if you were one of the applicants left in the pipeline, your application was deferred, you did not receive a contract last year, but you did apply, you either should have or will receive a letter from your local NRCS officials with information about applying and being reconsidered this year. And some of the changes I'll describe in a little bit, but you would need to take action. It would not just be automatic. So if you're in that category, I encourage you to check in with your local NRCS office. And each state has a point person identified for working on the organic initiative. And you can get that information from the NRCS website that I'll put up at the end of this show. So who's eligible for this organic initiative? Well, it can be a farmer who's just barely beginning to transition, still operating conventionally, but is beginning transition either on one field or the entire farm. That doesn't matter. It does not have to be the entire farm beginning transition in order to apply for funds on the fields that are entering transition. So farmers that are already in the process of transitioning, maybe in have completed year 1 or in year 2, and remember it's a 3-year transition period, so 36 months from the last application of prohibited material till the first harvest of an organic crop. So that's what's meant by the transitioning farms, are the ones that are in that. So anyone who is transitioning either the whole farm or fields is eligible. Existing certified organic farmers who transition additional acres or herds of livestock are eligible. Existing certified organic farms who adopt conservation measures to address natural resource environmental concerns are eligible, even without transitioning additional land. But if you have some resource concerns to be addressed, you're eligible. And then an existing certified organic farm who wants to both transition additional production and adopt conservation measures on existing organic land would be eligible. So just about anybody that either is transitioning land or has resource concerns to address should visit your local NRCS office and begin the application process. This year, those 6 core practices are gone. Each state is authorized to select the practices that they offer. And the headquarters in D.C. provided some guidance to the states on how they should select those conservation practices. I know in Minnesota, the choice by the state NRCS is to offer the entire suite. Anything that they offer as a conservation practice under EQIP is eligible for consideration as part of an organic initiative contract. And NRCS has put out a table which goes kind of line by line through the National Organic Program standards and matches up those with NRCS practice standards that could address if there's a resource concern related to the NOP standard. Here's the practice standard to fit. And those also are available at that NRCS website that I'll show later. So those are some examples of some of the practices that were funded under the 2009 Organic Initiative, improving the nutrient management of the operation, building strategies to build soil organic matter, adding more or new different cover crops, establishing contour strips if you're farming on hillsides, so a typical conservation practice there, enhancing the crop rotation by getting more diversity in the rotation, planting diverse field borders, so this is a very relevant practice where many organic farms need to have buffer zones where their land adjoins conventional crops. Well, here they can receive some assistance to actually plant those field borders or buffer zones in diverse species that enhance the biological control of the operation while providing a buffer to minimize drift and also minimize wind erosion. Establishing grass waterways to carry runoff so that it doesn't cut gullies, setting up rotational grazing and watering system under the prescribed grazing practice standards, or improving the forage harvest management of the operation. Those are some examples of some practices that were funded last year. This year, under EQIP, for the first time ever, the NRCS is offering a high tunnel season extension practice standard where in about 35 states this is being offered as interim practice standard for the next 3 years, where producers can, if they qualify, get a contract that pays $1.89 per square foot for construction of a seasonal high tunnel. And different states have slightly different rules on this. but it's a way that USDA is putting an emphasis on building local food capacities, getting a more diversified production on the rural landscape, and this is available through EQIP, and is not limited to the Organic Initiative, but if you're participating in the Organic Initiative and you're in a state that's offering this practice standard, it's something that you could select as one of the practices you want to implement under the Organic Initiative. Under the initiative, the program payment rate is 75%. Now, under normal EQIP, it's typically less than that. So this is one of the advantages of enrolling under the Organic Initiative if you're transitioning or certified organic. If you are what's called a historically underserved participant, that would be a limited resource, socially disadvantaged, or beginning farmer, you could qualify for a payment rate of 90%. And states are the ones who are empowered to determine the payment schedules. Those are based on the costs incurred and income foregone for the Organic Initiative. If you enroll in the Organic Initiative under EQIP, there is a payment limit of $20,000 per year, not to exceed $80,000 over 6 years. That's only in this special pool for Organic Initiative. Now, you still could choose to qualify and apply under the regular EQIP, which has a much higher cap, a payment cap of $300,000. But if you choose to do so, then you are ranked against all other EQIP applicants. If you apply under the Organic Initiative, you're ranked against the other applicants in your state that are certified organic or are transitioning, that are applying for this specific pool of money. So you might want to check out with your NRCS official, which is the best fit for you and your operation. If you choose to apply, you do need to go to your local field office and speak with the staff. You'll have to complete an application form. This is the code number for that form to officially start the process. If you're don't already have a farm number with the Farm Service Agency, you will need to set up that account as well. Typically, the Farm Service Agency and NRCS are located in the same building, and it's just a matter of walking across the hall. But you do have to be registered with FSA, Farm Service Agency, in order to receive federal funds at all. So there's kind of a two-step process. You need to check in with both offices, but you do need to complete this official application form. And if you need help, these are very helpful staff, and they will walk you through the process and make sure that you understand the questions and complete it sufficiently. If you're already an existing organic farmer, you will need to, in addition to that application form, submit a copy of your current organic system plan, that 14, 15-page document that you fill out for your certifier. You'll need to have a copy of that for the NRCS, and that will be used to verify compliance with provisions in the organic statute, and then also as a basis for the EQIP plan of operations. What exactly are the practices that you are going to implement? You'll also need to provide the name and contact information of the USDA accredited certifier of your operation. Now, if you are in transition and haven't completed an organic system plan yet, you would fill out a very simple self-certification letter that includes a statement that you agree to develop and implement conservation practices for certified organic production that are consistent with an organic system plan. You would also provide the name of a USDA accredited certification agency that you have contacted to begin the certification process. But you don't have to have actually filled out an organic system plan and applied for certification yet. You just need to provide the name of the certifier that you've been in contact with. There's another opportunity that's offered under this program, but it's not offered in every state yet. And that is you can receive funds to establish what's called a Transition to Organic Conservation Activity Plan. You would, if you're approved for this and you're in one of the states that I'll list here, then you would receive payment to help you write a Transition to Organic Conservation Plan. This is being offered currently in Alabama, Arizona, Florida, Iowa, Indiana, Maine, Missouri, North Carolina, North Dakota, Nebraska, New Mexico, New York, Pennsylvania, South Dakota, Utah, Wisconsin, and West Virginia. These are states where there are technical service providers who are qualified to offer this kind of planning assistance. So these TSPs are paid to help you develop this Transition to Organic Conservation Activity Plan. And if you're interested in becoming a technical service provider, you can go to the website techreg.usda.gov to find out more. And this is an area where I do see the need for people with organic expertise, whether they be from universities or with inspection and certification or consultants, to think about becoming a TSP to offer organic planning services, because that's why so few states are offering it now, is they simply don't have qualified technical service providers in their states to do organic planning. I'd like to thank and acknowledge Ariane Lati for her help in putting this together. She is located in the D.C. office for the Organic Farming Research Foundation and National Sustainable Ag Coalition, and spends a lot of time in the offices at the NRCS and has helped improve their program, helped evaluate it, and organizes a working group of people around the country who've had input on it, and she helped me put this presentation together. Some of the resources, websites, the USDA National Organic Program, there's a link to that website where you can access the regulation, where you can read about all about the new pasture requirements. But if you would like to get the list of state organic contacts or find out more about the organic initiative, then you would go to the NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service website that's shown next. The National Sustainable Ag Coalition has done a tremendous job of consolidating, collecting information about this program, and that information is available at their website, although this morning their website wasn't working, at least when I tried to dial in. But keep trying, because there's tremendous, excellent resources there, as well as at the Organic Farming Research Foundation site, and then ATRA, the Appropriate Technology Transfer to Rural Areas, also has compiled excellent resources, and they have those available in Spanish as well. So I will close and be happy to take any questions about conservation practices on organic farm or the new opportunities offered by the EQIP Organic Initiative.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim. I'd like to repeat for any listeners who might have missed the beginning of the webinar that if you have a question for Jim, you can just type it into the question box on your screen and hit return. If your question box is not visible, hit the small plus sign next to the word question to open it up. We will read out the questions and answer as many as we have time for. We have about half an hour or so. I'm going to start with the first one that came in, which is, how does pest and weed control interact with maintain and improve biodiversity?
Yeah, well, on a conventional operation, there's many pesticides and herbicides that are not specific to only the target pests that have very significant impacts on the biodiversity of an operation. And so on an organic farm, you aren't using those broad type of pesticides or herbicides. The few pesticides that are approved for organic use typically are very specific or have a short duration as far as their efficacy in the environment. So that's one impact right there. But the regulation also requires that an organic operator do proactive things to enhance the biodiversity and provide habitat for beneficial insects, birds, bats, amphibians, spiders, etc., that will keep the pest populations in check, in control. So, and you actually have to do the proactive and preventative strategies before you can resort to the use of an approved input, whether it's a natural input, some kind of botanical or biological or mineral input, or an approved synthetic substance that's on the national list. You can't just switch from a chemical recipe over to this approved input approach. You first must implement the biological controls, the preventative, proactive strategies, and when they alone are insufficient, then you can complement those with some kind of an input.
Okay. The next group of questions, several people have asked more or less the same question, whether an organic farmer has to have been farming for 2 years to qualify. What about those who have not who have been managing a farm but not owning or leasing, or people that are making the transition from managing a farm to managing their own farm?
Yeah, that's something I would take the question directly to the NRCS office and tell them your situation, because, when you read the rules for the EQIP program, and this is true for the Organic Initiative and the Season Extension High Tunnel program, it says that you must have documentation of at least $1,000 agricultural income per year for the last 2 years. So you do need to have some experience as an agricultural producer. I mean, $1,000 isn't a lot of income, but how can a beginning farmer ever meet that threshold? If a priority for USDA is to help beginning farmers get established, there may be a conflict here, because they wouldn't necessarily have been farming and selling $1,000 of agricultural products per year for the last 2 years if they're truly a beginning farmer. So I would, first, it doesn't matter whether you rent or own the land. You still can qualify if you are the operator and you establish a farm number with FSA. So you do need to do that. You would take in any records of agricultural activity, agricultural production, as well as if you're filing a Schedule F, a farm sheet in your income taxes. That's the kind of proof they'd like to see. But there is a bit of a contradiction, and I would not hesitate to still go in and see if there's anything that they can do for you if you're truly in that beginning farmer category. And if these are people who are being shut out, then this is the kind of issue that we need to take back to NRCS and let them know that the program is not working for the truly beginning farmers who would like access to this program.
Okay, that's very helpful. The next question, I was told last year by the local NRCS that EQIP would not fund creating new organic grazing on a vacant separate 10-acre plot because I did not currently have animals on it. They said EQIP only wants to fix bad examples, not create organic from scratch, but only to fix existing locations and practices. As in, she couldn't fund building a new pasture rotation on a plot of land that did not currently have animals on it.
Yeah. And I was kind of losing you. You were fading in and out there a little bit.
Sorry about that. I can.
But I think I got the gist of the question. And yes, EQIP is designed to correct resource concerns. If you're already fully have implemented all the conservation practices, then going to the CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, is probably a better fit. But most farms have some resource concerns that could be improved. And this issue of not funding a rotational grazing where there hadn't previously been animals, did I hear that part of the question correctly?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's curious because so long as you meet the eligibility requirements, I am not aware that the land has to have been previously pastured in order to qualify. That may be, someone's interpretation, or if it was under last year's program, they may not have met any of the core 6 practices that were kind of the entry point before you could talk about anything beyond that. So I would keep trying, and if there's a problem, contact the State Organic Initiative designated contact person, because they may be more up on what's possible under this program than the local district conservationist or technician.
Okay. Do you hear me now, Jim?
Yeah.
Okay. What about the relationship between crop rotation and permanent pasture?
Well, the concept of crop rotation, typically applies to annual cropping systems, although the definition in the organic regulation does address perennial systems that need to meet the same objectives as a crop rotation on an annual system. So managing nutrients, preventing erosion, breaking pest and disease cycles. But if and so you'll see orchards, for instance, do understory planting that provides habitat. It helps break pest and disease cycles, prevents erosion, etc. In lieu of a crop rotation, you certainly aren't going to rotate the crops, fruit trees, for instance. If it's truly a permanent pasture, there may be funds to enhance the biodiversity of that pasture by, if it's currently in cool season grasses, planting some native prairie grasses, some warm season grasses, or planting some forbs that are palatable, for the livestock species. So that would be a way of diversifying and providing more feed value and managing nutrients better, possibly some things that are better in drier soil conditions. But yeah, it's not a one-to-one comparison, because nobody's going to require you to destroy your pasture if you're organic because it says you have to rotate your crops. No, a perennial cropping system is recognized, but there are objectives to meet that are very similar to the ones for an annual crop rotation. But there are practice standards to help improve your pasture. besides just the fencing and watering, but actually seeding or fertilizing with approved inputs, those also could qualify.
Okay. If I am not certified organic yet, but I've been growing organically, do I need to try to get certified first before I apply to this grant, or can I do both at the same time?
Yes, you can do both. I mean, technically, you'd still be a transitioning operation, even though the land itself may have gone under the 3 years or longer of organic management. If you haven't applied for certification and you are applying, as far as the NRCS goes, your current status would be a transitioning operation, and you're not going to be penalized if you receive certification in the same year that you're approved. There's a related issue that is somewhat still unresolved. The NRCS Organic Initiative was really written to address certified organic producers and producers that are transitioning, either their whole farm or a field or whatever, or certified producers that are adding more land. It did not really anticipate the exempt farmer. And under the Organic Foods Production Act, a small farmer that sells less than $5,000 a year of organic products does not have to be certified, but yet can market their products as organic. The status of such operations is unclear currently, and that's something that we're working on with NRCS to have, more clear in the future, because that is a legal status. They have to follow the law. They have to, if there's a complaint, be able to prove that they indeed meet the same standards as certified organic operations, but because they're less than $5,000 a year of organic sales, they're exempt under the law and the rule from having to get certified. But where do they fall in the NRCS framework, which was really written to address certified organic and operations that are transitioning to certified organic production? So stay tuned on that one, and I'm sure there'll be more information about that.
Okay, here's another question. We're getting a lot of questions coming in, so I hope we'll have time for all of them.
I'll try and be brief.
Okay. No, not to rush you, Jim, but just wanted to warn you. There's a lot of
Yeah, that's fine.
That's great. Do I need to have produced at least $1,000 worth of product, or actually sold at least $1,000 in 2009 to qualify? We were unable to sell harvest this past season because of a dispute over the legality of our farm stand and bad weather.
Well, let's see. I believe it's organic sales. But once again, that's the kind of thing that if you produced it and there were extenuating circumstances where, for some reason or another, natural disaster or a dispute in this instance, you weren't able to sell it, there may be some allowance given. So I would just approach the local NRCS with all the documentation you have and see if you can proceed with the application process.
Okay, we're getting several questions about whether or not the presentation will be available after the end of the webinar, and I just wanted to answer that one. Yes, it will. On our website at http www.extension.org. I'll write this down and send it into the question box, but it's http www.extension.org/organic_production. The recording of the presentation along with the slides will be available. So I just wanted to tell everyone who asked that question. Okay, here's another question. Is EQIP money available to individuals who want to start up an organic farm?
Yes, but it does depend on where you're at in that startup process. That's where this complication of having to have documentation of $1,000 of agricultural sales in each of the last 2 years can work against you. And if you have not farmed before and you're just wanting to totally begin farming, I would still talk with them and see if there's any language under the beginning farmer support as a historically underserved operation where a waiver could be made for that 2 years of organic sale or agricultural sales. But this does raise a policy issue that I think needs to be addressed, because the USDA is very clear on wanting to support beginning farmers and expand the number of young people in agriculture and diversify production and all of these things that are under the Know Your Food, Know Your Farmer initiative. But if they have rules under this program that prevent entry by beginning farmers or prevent participation, there's a bit of a policy conflict. But once again, talk to your local conservation office staff and see if there's anything they can do for you given that situation.
Okay, next question. I would like to establish a co-op business that converts horse manure from backyard horse owners into compost for organic farmers. Would this be eligible for funding?
No, I don't believe so, unless it's part of a larger agricultural operation. And if so, then there are practice standards for composting, and I would look into that. But if it's simply more of a kind of industrial type operation where you're, as it was described, just bringing in manure, composting it, and selling the compost to organic farmers, that doesn't sound to me like the kind of thing that would qualify. It really, you need to be registered as a farm, as an agricultural operation. So if you do qualify as a farm and actually conduct agricultural activities in addition to this composting operation, then it might be possible. So once again, contact your local office and lay out what you're thinking, what your plans are, and see what they say.
Okay. The USGS conducted herbicide tests on the Bighorn and North Platte River basins used for irrigation and came up with results. How does this new testing with greater sensitivity impact transitions to organic in these areas and downstream?
Well, not knowing the results and not knowing the level of contaminants, I could only speculate. But the organic regulation really doesn't adequately address irrigation water by setting maximum contaminant levels. If the irrigation water were so polluted, however, that a crop grown under organic conditions, if it were sampled and tested and found to be over 5% of the EPA tolerance for a given contaminant, that could not be sold as organic. That would trigger an investigation as to why is this product contaminated. If it's found that the irrigation water is the source and you are introducing prohibited materials that are contaminating your crops, then that would be a violation, but not because there's clear metrics established for allowable irrigation water. It would have to be based on evidence of contamination and then determine the source of the contamination, and then action would be taken to prohibit that particular source, but it would be evidence-based.
Is a grower applying for OI more competitive the more practices they apply for? Conversely, if a producer is just interested in the high tunnel initiative, does that make them less competitive?
Well, yes and no. Typically under EQIP, and this is any part of EQIP, the more practices that you qualify for, the more resource concerns that you agree to address, the better. The higher your application is going to be scored. That's true for the Organic Initiative as well. But here you're facing less competition if you're in the Organic Initiative pool. You're only scored against the other applicants in this pool. It's my understanding that with the new high tunnel initiative, that states are looking for applicants, and it is a brand new program, and so there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of interest in it, and you may be scored just against other high tunnel applicants. And so if you meet all the qualifications, there's probably a good chance that you're going to get funded, because they do want to see some of these practices implemented on the ground. You know, and every county, I think, has an interest in getting some of these funded. So I wouldn't sell yourself short and think just because you're only going to address high tunnel or just one resource concern is not worth your time, because it certainly could be.
Can CRP ground be qualified as organic when the program time period ends?
It depends on what happened during the time it was under the CRP. A lot of people assume that that's no prohibited materials, and that's not necessarily the case. There may be spot spraying for noxious weeds, for instance. So it still needs to have that 3-year field history with no prohibited materials. But often it does meet the qualifications and can go directly into organic production out of CRP. But you can't just assume that. It has to be verified. No prohibited materials were applied. And you know, and just an agronomic comment on that. You know, some people you know, think, oh, it comes out of CRP, so you got all these nutrients that have just been building up there. It's really going to make great organic ground. Well, a lot of those nutrients are tied up in, you know, carbonaceous material that takes time to break down and become nutrients that are available for the crops. And so it may be better to, you know, break up the CRP and plant a cover crop, or get it into some kind of soil building crop rather than a crop like corn that is, you know, takes a lot of nutrients. So it just takes some good planning to be successful in growing a good crop coming right out of CRP.
Okay, we have a comment here. Someone wrote in that the NRCS EQIPed web page has not been updated since July of 2009, and she recommends the ATRA, the NSAC, and the OFRF pages as good resources for information about the program. Also, she mentioned that 5 states have deadlines later than the national deadline. Missouri is 319, Nevada 319, Ohio 319, Louisiana 326, and Colorado 416.
Well, I certainly appreciate someone checking that website. I certainly think that when I checked, there was more up-to-date information on the National NRCS site. But yeah, I totally endorse those other sites that were mentioned. And as far as states having different deadlines, that's news to me. That you know, that's something that I think we'll check on. But at least none of them are earlier. That's the good news.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Would there be assistance for changing an existing 3-year rotation to a 4-year rotation?
Exactly. Yeah, that's the kind of thing, to enhance your rotation, to get more soil building crops in there. And if you're adding in cover crops, that might qualify for that additional practice standard.
Okay. Would a high tunnel rainwater runoff collection and redistribution system be considered under this program?
I don't know that there's a practice standard for that. Putting up the high tunnel could be part of the contract. But as far as getting any cost share to capture the water and use that for irrigation, that's a great innovative practice. I don't know that NRCS has anything yet to help with that. But like most of these things, it never hurts to ask to see if there is a practice standard that this would fit under. But yeah, I encourage, I mean, that sounds like a great approach.
Okay. In New York State, the New York NRCS maintains that if an organic farmer is already rotating their crops, they don't qualify for the rotation standard due to the overall regulations in EQIP, which only allow for funding new practices. Implementation of practices is farmer-based. A farmer knows how to do it, not land-based according to staff. Is this the same interpretation occurring in other states?
Well, if you're enhancing your rotation, like the previous question, adding new crops, extending the rotation, that hopefully would still qualify in New York State. But yeah, if you already have a good soil building crop rotation, that's not going to be a resource concern, and you're not going to qualify for an EQIP payment. That, you know, if you've addressed other resource concerns on that same farm, you probably should visit the NRCS office and talk with them about the Conservation Stewardship Program, because it does offer payments for existing practices, whereas EQIP, regular EQIP, and the Organic Initiative is really to improve your practices.
Okay. I planned about 5,000 square feet in high tunnels. Is that considered a small farm or nursery operation?
Well, it's an agricultural operation, and if you have proof of selling at least $1,000 of agricultural products per year, then, you know, for the last 2 years, then it would appear to me that you would qualify as an agricultural operation. But, you know, there might be questions about the types of crops. Are you growing food crops, or are you growing nursery crops? Yeah, I can't answer that fully. You would, once again, have to go to your local office, lay out exactly what you're doing and what you have in mind, and you know, hopefully that you would still qualify, and that would be seen as an agricultural production operation.
Okay, we have time for a few more questions. Here's one. Is there a location to get a list of contacts to write an organic transition plan by state available at this point?
Well, if you are one of the states that has the conservation activity plan offered as a, you know, transition to organic activity plan, they do have a list of the approved technical service providers that operate in that state. So you would need to go to your state NRCS website or contact your local office and ask them to get you a list of TSPs, technical service providers, that are qualified to write conversion to organic or transition to organic activity plans.
Okay. Is it correct that the program payment rates are 90% for beginning farmers, which would imply that the program would apply to beginning farmers?
Well, right. But that may conflict with that 2 years of agricultural production and sales of $1,000 a year each year. That's something that we need to keep working on and resolve. But yes, if you do qualify as a beginning farmer or socially disadvantaged or limited resource, then your payment rate would be 90% versus 75% for others who get contracts under the Organic Initiative.
Okay. Many small market farms in the Intermountain West struggle with implementing a cover crop green manure organic practice and simply resort to compost applications. Is this outside of the intent of the NOP?
Well, there needs to be some kind of a crop rotation to qualify under the NOP. So, you know, there may be, you know, cover crops that are suited to that region that they simply haven't been tried on those operations, or they may, if they irrigate their cash crops, may need to irrigate their cover crops to get them established to achieve all the multiple benefits that are achieved through a soil building crop rotation. But yeah, on this, at the end of the day, it depends on how the accredited certifier views that organic system plan and whether it complies with the regulation. But without having any kind of a crop rotation, if it's year after year of the same crop and then an application of compost, come back with some other soil depleting crop, my personal opinion would be that would be outside of the requirements for certified organic production.
Okay, here's a comment from someone who wanted to clarify the previous question about the $1,000 requirement. He quoted NRCS policy, which says, in order to be considered an agriculture producer, there must be an annual minimum of $1,000 of agricultural products being produced, sold, or both from the operation or from the land in which an owner has an interest, according to 7 CFR Part 1400. If there were reasons beyond the producer's control, like climatic conditions such as drought, to meet the $1,000 annual minimum, then documentation must verify that the $1,000 minimum has been met 2 of the last 5 years.
Oh, that's very good clarification.
Yeah, thank you for that. We are running out of time here, so I just wanted to say that anyone who hasn't gotten their questions answered, will try to follow up with you by email. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us on this webinar. And if there's anything that you missed or you'd like to hear it again, or if you'd like to share the link with others, the webinar has been recorded and it will be available along with all of the slides on the eOrganic website at http://www.extension.org/organic_production. I sent that link in the question box for anybody who's interested. And on that website, you can also find out about our upcoming webinars and listen to Jim's previous webinars. Thank you so much again, Jim, and thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you, Alice, and thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.